I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for asking.
Yeah, of course.
First of all, congrats on the wedding, you and your husband,
Oh,
newly
thank
new,
you.
newlyweds.
Yes, newlyweds. Been a week and a month and a week. Yeah,
How do you feel?
it feels great, and it's nice that the bull run didn't really get started until after because if all of this was happening and I was, slammed with emails during the honeymoon and during the wedding, it wouldn't have been as fun.
You called Bitcoin and said, hang on, wait for
Yeah,
me.
it's like, can you hang? Just take off in November and we'll be good.
Well, as you mentioned, it's a great time to be a Bitcoiner. We literally just touched a new all-time high, close to
Yep.
94K US moments ago. We spoke 3 years ago when we had just hit I think the tippy top of the 69K, just around that area in November of 2021. Um, Most people always feel like they've missed out on Bitcoin. You talk to normies, and can you make the case that it's actually never too late to be a Bitcoiner? This is not a crypto or a Bitcoin podcast. I cover many subjects. I have authors, politicians, musicians, all kinds of people. So this is really like for the normies.
Yeah, I've actually been saying lately, it's definitely not too late. You're very early. I know that for so many people, especially if they're new to Bitcoin, they think, oh, I didn't get it at $10 a coin or 100, so it's definitely not worth it at this point to come in. But what they don't realize is that there is really no limit to Bitcoin because it has a total addressable market of 8 billion people, and there's about $900 trillion of money in different asset classes of just wealth, and some of it is debt in the world. And Bitcoin right now represents 1.7 or 1.8 trillion dollars. That's not indicative of what it will be. So think about that for a moment. If it grows to be 20 trillion, that's 10x. If it grows to be 50 trillion, 100 trillion, I mean, there's so much upside. It's really the best asymmetric opportunity. And again, it's the addressable market is everybody because everyone can start accumulating just a tiny bit of Bitcoin. And I think that that's incredible and empowering too. There's no better way really to save for the future in a world of 100 and something debasing currencies where we know they're going to have to print money and issue more debt. And really, what is the lifeline? I mean, people, I guess, have done well with property, right? Or investing in equities, but that's not representative of the majority of people. The working class needs a tool like Bitcoin. And I'm really excited that it's here because it gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Hmm. Tell me about the moment that you were orange pilled. What year was it? When was it? What was your kind of headspace at that moment?
Sure. We all owe so much to the people who introduced us to Bitcoin. It was 2016. I was working as an investigative journalist and breaking news reporter in Sacramento, California. So I was covering a lot of the state capital and what was happening with California legislature. And I had friends who lived in San Francisco and worked in tech. And one day we were all hanging out and someone mentioned Bitcoin or crypto. And I was very curious, but of course, like everyone, I was so dismissive. I was so skeptical. But I love what Michael Saylor says about Bitcoin because it's on a need to know basis. If you need to know, you're going to be curious enough to ask. And of course, as a struggling reporter who was barely making enough, probably paying more than 50% at the time to rent, not being able to save and student loan debt and all that, I was like, what is this thing? Could it be something that I put a little bit of money into and it grows and allows me to save for my future? So I think a lot of people come in, like I did, from that speculative gambling mentality, almost like, is this the lottery ticket that I've been waiting for? And then you start to learn about it. And wow, was that a humbling, fulfilling experience? Because when you go down the journey of really asking the question, what is money? And how does the banking system work? And how is debt issued? And how does this whole financial system function? It's really eye-opening and you realize that you should have learned a lot more of this in school, and there's almost like a panic of just trying to get as much information as possible, and then you go to that next phase where, oh, this is not a speculation, this could actually solve so many of the problems that exist today. And then it gets really inspiring and hopeful, and I'm so grateful that from 2016 to now, I look at my journey and I wish I had studied it faster and sooner so that I could have bought more earlier. But we obviously all have to go through that process and take the time to study, and we get Bitcoin at the price we deserve.
Yeah, everyone does wish they got it cheaper. It reminds me of a tweet I read years ago that just said that, people come for the money and they stay for the culture, they stay for the philosophy.
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a very thought-provoking community. It's very inspiring and motivating to see so many successful people, brilliant people from different backgrounds, different industries, leaders of their industry all come together and make the same conclusion, which is that Bitcoin is the best form of money and capital and savings. And it's really it's been a humbling experience to just be able to talk to these people. I mean, one of my goals when I started the podcast was just, can I just learn a little bit more about these fascinating, brilliant people that are talking about Bitcoin and believe that it's the future? And now to be able to call some of them my mentors has just been it's just been such a gift. I'm so grateful.
Yeah. I've been, educating or talking to people who, in good faith wanted to learn about it throughout these past few years. And it's funny, there's some people who, who've gotten their toes wet and tried it out but they really didn't study it the same way. And I don't pressure anyone, you learn quick that you don't want to be responsible for anyone's financial future. Um, what's your elevator pitch to people who say, like I've had friends say, oh, you know what, Bitcoin's just not for me. I can't stomach the volatility.
The thing that has worked best for me is adopting the elevator pitch of Jeff Booth, which is basically starting to ask people, why are things getting so much more expensive? Isn't technology supposed to make things cheaper? Why is a house, the same house, now it's older, 10 times more than it was just a couple decades ago? Like, why is that? And just sitting back and waiting for people to give me their responses. Because I think that what we take for granted, no matter where we are, whether we're in America or in a developing country, we take for granted the pernicious nature of inflation and what inflation really is. The fact that the more units that there are, the prices go up. And that's how we experience inflation is through rising prices. But the actual cause of inflation, it's a monetary phenomenon. It's just literally adding units to the supply. And I think we don't realize how hurtful that is over the long run, especially to the middle class, to the working class. And one of the things that was so beautiful about America, one of the reasons my parents worked so hard and waited so long to come here from Eastern Europe is because it represented this American dream that you could come from any background and you can achieve your dreams and you don't have to have a lot. You don't have to start with some special trust fund. You don't have to have the special connections. You can work hard and you could be part of this thriving middle class that was the backbone of our country. But when you have a system that is built on debt and constantly having to issue more debt just to sustain the debt, and you financialize the economy so that the working class is basically squeezed more and more over the years, and all of their wealth is siphoned away to the tippy top, that becomes an unsustainable society and economy because all of a sudden you have the average person feeling like there is no hope. Why am I working so hard and I can't get by and I can't make my life better and I can't provide for my family? That leads to populism, and I think we're seeing that. I think like if you look at the election and if you strip away politics, because we can disagree on some of the social things, and I think we always will, but when you strip it down to sort of just like this core frustration that people on both sides had, the solution is screaming at us. It's we have to fix the money. We have to fix the money, and that will level the playing field and give more opportunity to everyone, and not just the few and the closely connected to the money printer.
You mentioned, things getting more expensive, people noticing it. There is a moment when you do study Bitcoin where you kind of shift that train of thought and understand that things are actually getting cheaper if you calculate in Bitcoin, right? I've seen a video, I forget what these three guys are. They're talking on a podcast. It's like a 4 minute clip, and they start breaking down how, like the price of a house was like 400,000 4 years ago. And if you could start looking, like forgetting the volatility, looking at the 4 year cycle, and then just looking at the price of the house in Bitcoin, where it used to be, whatever, like 52 Bitcoin to own a home. And now it's down like, or the average home. And then now it's down to like six Bitcoin or four
Hmm.
Bitcoin. And, one day it'll go to one Bitcoin. And you just start like, I've never heard so many people in these past 4 years under the Biden administration say that, oh my God, things are so expensive and things are so expensive. And I'm
Yeah.
just like smiling to myself, kind of, I'm not saying anything. You don't want to start orange pilling left and right and being that annoying guy.
Yeah, I mean, completely. I think that this is one of the most exciting things, especially for young people who, again, felt like they haven't had a seat at the table. They can't afford what their boomer grandparents had when they were their age. And it's so cool to see that the median price of a home dropping when you price it in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is essentially demonetizing things like real estate. And I think, again, this is something that people really need to step back and think about. Yes, maybe their wages are going up. Maybe they got a 2% raise or maybe a 5% raise. But when the monetary inflation rate is about 7% each year, and then houses are going up by 10% each year, you can never keep up. I mean, you work harder and harder, and the oxygen is leaving the room, and the ice cube is melting. And so nothing has really been able to beat that rate of inflation the way that Bitcoin has, with, in my opinion, the lowest amount of risk, because you're not trying to time the market and guess when a company is going to, put out their latest earnings call based on some new product or service or the leadership changes. It's not about any of that. It is one asset class that is based on a global monetary network, accessible to everyone, that no one needs permission to take part in. And that is what is going to, I think, appreciate far more than any of these other asset classes. And you just set it and forget it. And you can have your wealth stored for the next 100 years if you want.
Mhm. How do you feel about the US election results you mentioned earlier 2 weeks ago? And what does it mean for Bitcoin looking forward? Do you think the scenario would be completely different if the Dems had won?
Well, I've always been really bullish regardless of who's in the White House, because at the end of the day, again, everyone needs Bitcoin, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, somewhere in between. You need it to protect your savings and to protect you from the debasement that we know is going to continue, again, despite whoever comes into office. I think I agree with the general consensus that if Kamala Harris had won, that we might have taken a little bit more time to grind up against some resistance, because there are more regulatory pressures and resistance from the previous administration. We saw that with, for example, SAB 121, which there was a bipartisan decision and desire to repeal that and allow banks to custody Bitcoin. And all of a sudden, Biden came in and vetoed that. So I think that's going to change, in addition to just paving the way, clearing the path for just more favorable regulation in general. And so I'm not surprised that when President Trump was named like the clear winner, all of a sudden Bitcoin went crazy, because they think that with a pro Bitcoin president in office and him having the ability to appoint very pro Bitcoin people in leadership positions, that's really going to be great for the industry.
Not only a Bitcoin president, but his whole administration. Like Vivek
Mhm.
Ramaswamy owns Bitcoin. I believe Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, just came out saying that, most of his wealth is in
Yeah.
Bitcoin. It's pretty fascinating stuff. Like it's no longer, I mean, it's mainstream. I explain it to people who haven't really gotten into it. I'm like, this is not, marginal or weird anymore, or like, nerd internet money.
Yeah, and what's cool too is people, especially those that don't really understand Bitcoin, they're not aware of the second and third order effects of if we go down the Bitcoin standard path and we adopt Bitcoin, because so many people were excited about RFK, for example, because of the Make America Healthy Again movement.
Yeah.
Well, if you really peel back the layers of the food system and the pharmaceutical system, one of the reasons that we have such problems is the concentration of wealth and power through these monopolies that can only exist in a fiat system where you rig capitalism and you allow for special interest groups to pay off the politicians and the regulators, and you create a system that basically makes everyone sick and then profits off of it. I don't think that we would have such a problem if we truly existed in a capitalistic system where people had to really compete for value, and it was much more difficult for companies to become these massive monopolies or oligopolies. So I am actually really inspired because not only do you have people in office that are going to start to tackle some of the corruption in these different agencies and industries, but if you add Bitcoin as the base layer and as a new form of capital for us economically, it will also fix some of these things without anyone having to do anything.
Yeah, 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, you could have one Bitcoin for $15,000, roughly $16,000 US. And the media was dancing on its grave. And when things go sour for Bitcoin and when it starts, peaking down, suddenly I had people calling me up, going, "Are you okay?" And all like, obviously, we don't understand. It's like, well, it's the same product, different price, right? So, I mean, if I'm not okay because I don't have enough liquidity to buy as much as I'd like to at this price because it's really interesting. And I mentioned earlier that when you come to Bitcoin, you come for the money initially, but then you stay for the culture, for the philosophy. And it's really true because it seems like you understand so much more about life, even purchasing power we mentioned earlier. Um, and you understand as well when you start reading in the media just articles about Bitcoin that the media doesn't know what it's talking about. I've seen articles about Michael Saylor losing his bet and,
Mhm.
just everything's going down and they're conflating the exchanges with the actual asset, which was really like you apply that to anything and you realize that, everyone's losing trust in the media and with, rightfully so. But that was like a clear signal for me, like on one end for like just the loss of trust completely in the media.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a huge, it really screams out to me too, because that's the world that I come from. And it shows me how early we really are. I come from the mainstream media world where it was really difficult for me to cover this space and to do Bitcoin stories because people are just so uneducated, not just about Bitcoin, but again, how the financial system works. And there is not a priority or an incentive to cover the truth within how our legacy financial and banking system works and where money comes from. And so with Bitcoin, yeah, it's crazy to see that so many people still dismiss it when they've done very little homework on it. And that's always what gets me is if you ask the people who are writing these articles how much time they've actually put in to studying Bitcoin or economic theory, Austrian economics, money, it's usually very little. And they're very resistant to admit that to you. They don't want to admit that they've barely studied it, but oh, they're ready to tell you that it's bad and it's going to crash. Um, when Bitcoin was going up to that last all-time high in November 2021, I was so sure that it was going to 100K. And it's funny that that's when the floodgates open. Everyone comes in, like you said, people are contacting you left and right. It's that FOMO mentality. But honestly, what a gift it was for it to come back down to those prices. Because for those of us who wanted to stack more and who had the conviction, we got an opportunity to dollar cost average and to have an entry point or to buy in at lower prices that I did not think we were going to see. And now I don't think we'll ever see those prices again. I don't think that we'll ever see 15, 20, $30,000 Bitcoin. So what a blessing it was for those of us who were on that journey. And when everyone was dismissing us, we just kept buying and stacking. And so, there is something to be said about being early to a new trend, something that's going to be a mega trend. That doesn't mean that you're too late if you're not into Bitcoin now, but everyone who took the time when everyone was basically decrying it as dead, they can reap the benefits now. And there's a huge payoff seeing it double, triple, quadruple in price.
Are you getting the phone calls? Are you starting to get, like texts and phone calls? We talk about that, especially in the last 2 years, like everything's dead. No one's paying attention.
Yeah.
The people who are still here are really going to reap the benefits in the future. But, it's like, well, when retail comes, when the tourists come, when your mom starts texting you about Bitcoin, that's like a sign. Have those started rolling in?
Yes, yes. I've heard from people who I haven't heard from since that last bull run that left us at an all-time high of 69,000 in 2021. And all of a sudden, there's this renewed interest. Everyone's wanting to know how to buy. I'm getting questions about other tokens. I'm like, no, 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 just Bitcoin. So yeah, the craze is definitely here, and I think it's actually going to accelerate because once we blast through six figures, which could really be any day now, I think that a lot of people are going to step back and think, I didn't expect for it to get there. And if it can get to six figures, if it can get to 100, how far can it go? Could it go to two? Could it go to three? Could it go to a million? I mean, if you're watching the people that are the thought leaders of the space, some of them are predicting $13 million of Bitcoin. So are you late? Will you feel like you were too late if you got in at 100,000? Probably not. But yeah, it's really funny to see people come out of the woods and want to know about Bitcoin again.
Is Bitcoin officially recognized as an asset in the US? And if so, because I've heard talk about like borrowing against your Bitcoin. We hear that a lot, where you could borrow like you would a house. Is that something that's possible at all in the States?
Yeah, so Bitcoin is pristine collateral, and there are companies that offer those types of financial services. The interest rates are, they're a little bit higher, but that's one of the things that I think will change with SAB 121. When the big banks, the too big to fail banks, can custody Bitcoin, you're going to be able to loan out your Bitcoin, earn a return on your Bitcoin much easier. I think that that's going to increase the competition really in that space. It's going to make it, I think, a little bit harder for some of the smaller Bitcoin companies because right now, again, yes, I can put up my Bitcoin and earn a return from maybe like a niche firm, but what if Bank of America offers it, right? What are people going to choose? And that's what I think is going to be really interesting to see. And I do think that it's going to be used as collateral in the future, not just by individuals, but of course companies. And I think it's going to be in our reserves as a U.S. strategic reserve. And I think every nation state will acquire Bitcoin.
Well, El Salvador has learned that early. That's really interesting what's going down there. Have you been to El Salvador and have you experienced like buying a coffee with your Bitcoin? And how soon can we expect that? I mean, even just paying off some credit card debt, with your Bitcoin directly. Do you see that coming at all?
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of my favorite things right now is actually earning rewards in Bitcoin. Because I don't
Mhm.
know if you are like this or any of your viewers, but there's such an incentive to use, say, a credit card because you're going to earn loyalty points at your favorite
Yeah.
hotel or airline, right? Well, I'd rather earn Bitcoin. And I actually did a whole episode on this a while back because the inflation rate, people don't realize the inflation rate of loyalty points at places like hotels and airlines, it's like 30 to 40% a year. So you have to spend a lot, and then all of a sudden those are being devalued. And so I'd rather just earn Bitcoin. So companies like Fold and my Lightning Wallet, Speed, like you can actually earn Bitcoin back when you make purchases, which is so exciting. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. And yeah, I've spent my Bitcoin. I want to support companies and businesses that are on the Bitcoin standard. When I travel, you could buy your McDonald's with Bitcoin in Lugano, Switzerland. I was, of course, in El Salvador where I did purchase some coffee on Lightning, and El Salvador was beautiful. I've been there twice. I had the chance to sit down with President Nayib Bukele, and I'm really inspired by what he's doing. I mean, I'm someone who tends to be very wary and skeptical of politicians, but this is a person who, first of all, has really taken the time to study Bitcoin. He's read the Bitcoin Standard, he's read a lot of different economic theory and Ray Dalio, and he's like a student of economics and finance and business. And he's choosing to embrace something that he will never be able to control or manipulate. And so for the criticisms that are out there, it's like, well, how can you criticize someone who's giving access to a form of money and a form of capital that is truly something that empowers his citizens to be self-sovereign and not something that he will ever be able to inflate or control or manipulate? I think that's really wonderful. And I think he will benefit from being the first country. And I think that El Salvador will um, I think it'll impress us over the next few decades. And so much activity is already happening there with regards to tourism and businesses and people no longer wanting to leave. I mean, I went there, I visited places like Hope House and met locals. Their dream 10, 20 years ago was I have to go to America. If I want to survive or if I want to prosper economically, I have to leave. And now they're actually coming back, or they're saying I can be prosperous here. That's really exciting.
Incredible. We were wondering actually, my fiance and I, we have two young boys. Last time we spoke, I didn't have any kids. Now I have two. And
Oh.
we were wondering about El Salvador as a travel destination, as like is it kind of like a friendly place where with beaches and like where we could hang out?
Oh yeah, El Zante was absolutely beautiful. I recommend the Garden Hotel. It was, I can't even describe the sunsets and sunrises. It's one of the only places I've been where literally you have the most beautiful sunrise and you see also the sunset because of where it's positioned. And I got to surf there for the first time. I mean, it's still definitely, I mean, they're building infrastructure, right? So this is a place, it's like a startup. It's like a startup nation. They're injecting a lot of energy and capital and attention. And I can only imagine how quickly it's going to grow. It kind of reminds me of when I first visited Cabo San Lucas. I was in high school and I visited again probably less than 10 years later, and it was like a different place. I mean, it had grown so quickly and so much had sprouted up in terms of like housing and hotels and commercial places. And so I think that El Salvador is going to experience a very similar renaissance because there's so much attention and capital going there.
I'll have to ask you about your spots if we do choose to go. Um, with institutions now, because obviously in January the big thing was the ETF, right? Like
Yeah.
all these companies, these hedge funds, filing for ETFs. We've been waiting for this for a very long time. It was just around the corner. It was a very big corner. Finally, the ETFs arrived. You have players like Fidelity and BlackRock, and this is like mainstream adoption.
Yes.
It's almost like it was too easy. You'd see it come around. And I was telling my cousin in LA, like, well, it's, Bitcoin's at around 39K right now, like January 9th. Here it comes. The floodgates are opening. It's like, yeah, whatever. And obviously there's always, I don't know if you have that, but there's just a little part of you that's a bit skeptical, like can it be this easy, right, with like the 4-year cycles, and even with the halving and then the election, and everyone was saying, well, post election usually things skyrocket, and we call it October and November and all that. um with all these institutions and now like government and what Trump is planning to do with like Senator Loomis, uh and these 4-year cycles, like are they, do you think they remain intact in the future, or like with a classic bear market where things kind of get slow and then it revs up again, or do you think this is like a game changer where like everything's been broken and now the institutions, the nation states are here, and it's just gonna like super cycle, or I don't know, like break the whole 4-year cycle thing where it's like very predictable?
Well, I think a US strategic Bitcoin reserve would be huge. I mean, for the United States to announce that it's buying Bitcoin, I think the floodgates would really open and I think the price could just hockey stick up and I don't even know what it could go to. But I would say that Bitcoin is one of the most predictable, unpredictable asset classes. And what I mean by that is there's always something, right? I mean, the ETF release, for example, that was a buy the rumor, sell the news. And then
Yeah.
we were chopping along and consolidating for a really long time. And no one knew what was going to happen with the election. I mean, there are things that happen along the way that are really unpredictable and they can cause seismic moves and turbocharge the volatility in the short run. But again, like you step back, you zoom out, and what is the trajectory of Bitcoin? Up and to the right, right? Because at the end of the day, everyone can access this thing. Global liquidity over the long run will continue to increase because everyone needs to pay off the debt and nations need to continue to issue more currency. People need a way to save. And it perfects all the things that you would want in a form of money or a long-term store of value. So I think that there will be things along the way that create volatility for Bitcoin, and all of a sudden, oh man, the price temporarily crashes. We saw that with the yen carry trade when that went crazy during the summer, I think. Oh, people are predicting recession. Sure, but zoom out again, have that macro look, and don't think of Bitcoin as something you're going to trade in and out of. You're going to keep it for the next 4, 5, 10, 100 years. And then there isn't a lot of volatility. And so something like a nation state like America adopting Bitcoin, I think that that would just catapult it to even another level and hopefully over the long run kind of smooth out the volatility.
Hmm. Listen, I have one last question for you. It's a very simple one. How easy is it to interview Michael Saylor? I saw a clip you shared where you ask him a question and he's off to the races for 18 minutes.
Yeah. That's what he does. I mean, so you have to kind of you have to know which questions are your priorities because you might not get to ask all of them because you don't know how long-winded he'll be. But it's such an honor to interview him because I've never been in the presence of someone that they have such an ability to draw out analogies that are so profound and they have such historical context. Like Michael Saylor, if you watch his interviews, you know that he's such a student of engineering and the way his mind works. I always learn something new. I'm really fascinated by him. I think he's really impressive. I wish I would have bought MicroStrategy in 2020. And yeah, I mean, it's just great. And the more that you interview someone, obviously you feel more comfortable. So I hope I get to continue to interview him over the years.
Hmm. It's crazy. You say you learn something all the time. That's exactly how I feel every time we have like a group of friends where we go out for dinner once in a while who are holders, hodlers, and we discuss and it feels it's always like you're learning something new. There's always
Yeah.
like a new angle to everything. And as I said earlier, you learn something new about life even. Like
Yes.
it's kind of insane how like all this education comes through, Satoshi's creation.
Yeah, I never realized that studying economics would learning, whether that's philosophy, sociology, psychology, food science, nutrition, all these things come together, and Bitcoin is at the intersection of really all of it. And I guess it does make sense because the way we all interact with one another, one of the most important forms of information and communication we have is money and prices. And so I hope that Bitcoin ushers in a system that is based on truth, that is based on something that no one can cheat and manipulate. And I think that that would bring out the best in all of us. And every it would take every nation around the world to that next level of development, of productivity, of innovation and achievement. And that's why I'm so bullish on the future with Bitcoin.
Natalie, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your generosity.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I'll talk to you soon. Bye.